Hello, this is Professor James Strickler, and this is Political Science 1101, American Government. In this presentation, we are in Unit 1, Theories of Government, and this is Lesson 7, about the rule of a few. In this lesson, you'll learn about the positives and negatives of having rule by a few. You'll learn what an aristocracy is, and what an oligarchy is, and also learn an important example of oligarchy. Now, all this should be taken in the context of Aristotle's divisions of government. Aristotle thought out that there'd be possibly rule by one, or rule by a few, or rule by the many as the possible forms that government could take. He then also categorized these forms of government by a second dimension, whether or not the rulers ruled for the good of the people or for the good of themselves. So with that context in mind, let's now consider our specific subject for this lesson, and whether or not rule by a few people is a good idea for a society. Take a moment to think about that. As we learned in the previous lesson, we discussed rule by one, there can be both positives and negatives to these forms of government that make them, in the right circumstance, very desirable, or in the wrong circumstance, very destructive. Well, what about rule of the few? Is it going to be good or bad? Now, there are some reasons to think that it might be good. Some positive things about rule of the few. The first is that in rule of the few, there'd be a diversity of opinions. Unlike rule of the one, where you would only have the ideas of a single person, whether they were good or bad. In rule of the few, there would be a variety of perspectives on a problem among this ruling elite. And as a consequence, they might have to compromise and work with each other. This is a way that they could check each other's power. One of them has a bad idea of something to do. There's others in a position of power to say, no, you shouldn't do that. And hopefully keep the whole group doing what's best for the country that they're ruling over. But there are also some serious potential negatives for a few. One is they are likely to be the elites of society. Now, the reason this is possibly bad is that they wouldn't understand the interests of the masses. When you only have a few people in charge, they're likely to be drawn from the rich and powerful in society, and they might not understand what should be done to help the people they're supposed to be serving. They might even go farther and actually take advantage of their position to conspire either for themselves or for the elite groups that they're representing. Rather than actually checking each other, as we supposed might happen on the previous slide, they would work together to increase their power. It'd be a way for them to just help each other be selfish. And then next, another third possible negative is that rule of the few may have a tendency to devolve into tyranny. You have powerful, ambitious people who generally want to become more powerful. And if the other people that have power are their fellow members of this small group of government, they'll only gain power by taking it from them. And so there'll be competition there as they eliminate each other until only one is left truly in charge to become a tyrant. Now, beyond those sort of obvious potential negatives and positives of merely having a few people in charge, we have Aristotle's second dimension of whether or not they're behaving selflessly or selfishly. Now, if a leader is in a position where there are multiple opinions around, I shouldn't say a leader, a group of leaders are there where there are multiple opinions around, they still can behave selfishly. And even if they are elites, they could choose to be selfless. So this isn't the same thing as the previous slides. It's a different dimension. So what Aristotle did was he gave different names to these two points of view. If you have a few with all their potential good or bad traits, and they're behaving in a selfless manner, Aristotle chose to call them an aristocracy. That is a few people serving the masses to take care of them. Now, that word aristocracy is still used today. It's not just an ancient Greek word, but its meaning has changed over time. And I want you to know what the meaning has become so you can realize how it is, in a sense, misused. Now remember, as Aristotle is using it here, he's referring to an elite group of people in society that control society, but they're doing it for the good of everyone. So this was a wonderful title that the rich and powerful elite would love to apply to themselves. They describe themselves as aristocrats, and in so doing, they can communicate to the masses this notion that, yes, they are rich and powerful, but they're doing it for the good of everyone. So of course a rich and powerful person would want to be known as an aristocrat, as Aristotle used the term. But by them using that term to describe themselves, what happened was, over time, it came to be synonymous with just the idea of being a rich snob. The masses look at these rich and powerful people, and they don't see a group trying to serve all of society. They see them there as they're just trying to serve themselves. So the meaning has been twisted to now be almost the opposite of what Aristotle originally intended it. Instead, the term that he used for the few ruling elites who would do who would use government for their own selfish ends was oligarch. We were describing them as an oligarchy. This is the selfish few serving as the leaders in society merely to help themselves. Now, this is a word that is not commonly used today, oligarch, but there is one place that you will see it commonly used in the news, and that is to describe the ruling elites of Russia. What happened was, at the end of the Cold War, when the government of the Soviet Union collapsed, it was a communist government in which the government owned all the resources of the country. Well, when that government fell apart, all those resources were up for grabs. And people who were in powerful positions in that government grabbed those resources as their own. So one person might seize the mines and make them their personal possession. Another one person seized the oil wells, which had been owned by the government, made them his personal possession. And these people became among the richest people on the planet. Moscow is the most expensive place in the world to live now because there's so many billionaires there driving up the prices of everything. So you have this small group of very powerful people that are running Russia, and they're known collectively as oligarchs. Now, when the news media chooses to describe these Russian billionaires as oligarchs, they're sending a message, and that is their belief that these Russian oligarchs take advantage of their power to only serve their own selfish ends, not the needs of the people. So now let's review what we learned in this lesson. Most efficient form of government? Or is it there are checks on the power of them? Or is it that there's a unity of ideas? Or is it that public opinion is respected by them? The answer is that there are potentially checks on their power. Now, the most efficient form of government would be rule of one, so it's not that. And we aren't expecting them to all be united in what they're doing, since it's a group of people with potentially diverse interests. Instead, the positive is that they can check each other's power. That if one of them wants to do something crazy, the other ones can stop him. Let's review what a negative of the rule of the few is. Is it a negative that there's a diversity of ideas? Or that they might conspire together for their own ends? Or that the laws become very complicated? Or that it's impossible for them to ever get consensus, or in other words, agree on anything? While certainly some of these others are possible, that there are complicated laws and that it's difficult for them to get into consensus, it's not likely there'll be complicated laws. And it's certainly not impossible for them to get in consensus. Instead, the most likely worry is that they would conspire together to keep each other in positions of power at the expense of the masses. Ruling elites in a society? Was it the self-serving ruling elites, or the public service ruling elites, or the rich snobs? No, rich snobs is our modern term. Instead, the aristocracy were not selfish. For Aristotle, they were public service serving rulers. In contrast, Aristotle also used the term oligarchy. Does that mean all the ruling elites in a society are just the self-serving ruling elites? Or instead a group of public serving elites? Or is now finally the word used to describe rich snobs? Well, again, that's a modern concept. Instead, Aristotle used the word oligarchy to refer to a self-serving elite class that would run society for their own selfish ends. All right. What about today? Do we have examples of oligarchs that we can look to understand what he may have been talking about? If we do, are they Japanese industrialists, the British Parliament, pop entertainment stars, or Russian billionaires? Well, the example we used of oligarchs today is Russian billionaires, who, through their wealth and their positions, essentially control Russian society. All right, that does it for this lesson 7 of Unit 1. Next, we'll have Lesson 8 of Unit 1 about the rule of the many.